Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to another edition of the Daredevil Born Again Season 2 review series. And today I am going to be talking about Episode 7, The Hateful Darkness, which I have just finished watching. And this episode was very good. It was very enjoyable. I'm not going to lie, I felt that this episode, while it was good, I don't think it was as strong as the previous ones. I thought this episode, it wasn't necessarily weak, it was good, but I look at this episode as mainly as a setup for the season 2 finale, which is quite crazy when you think about it. But this episode, for the most part, did a good job in setting up the stage for the season 2 finale. It paid off a couple of little story arcs that had been a thing during season 2. But as I said, was it as strong as some of the previous episodes? No, probably not. Was it enjoyable? Absolutely. 100%. I can never really sit there and say I didn't enjoy that episode of Daredevil, because even if an episode of Daredevil isn't 100% perfect, you're always going to find some good things about it. You're always going to feel, well, this episode wasn't perfect, but it was still watchable. It was still good. And this episode, like I said, was just merely a warm up to set the stage for the season 2 finale. And the highlight of this episode was the return of our dark haired and sexy badass, the one and only Jessica Jones, played superbly by the lovely and talented Kristen Ritter. Love her so much, always good to see her. And even though she had two scenes in this episode, she didn't really have a big part like she did in the previous one. It was still great to see her, and anytime you've got Kristen Ritter back as Jessica Jones interacting with Charlie Cox's Matt Murdock slash Daredevil, it's always going to be a lot of fun. So, as always, I'm going to give a quick recap of what's happened so far, and then after that, we're going to get straight into discussing episode 7. So, as we saw previously in episode 6, we saw Wilson Fisk's mourning the death of his wife, Vanessa, and we also saw in this episode, we saw the return of Jessica Jones, who was looking after her daughter when her house is raided by a group of armed operatives. And we saw Jessica Jones fighting off the attackers, and we saw her telling her daughter Daniel not to play with the grenades as it's not a toy. So we saw Daredevil and Jessica Jones meet up for the first time since the Defenders miniseries, and we saw the two of them working together as they took down various AVTF officers at the facility. But during this attack, we saw Jessica Jones' powers were not up to 100% as they slowly started to fade during a fight. And also in this episode, we saw Karen Page was almost ready to kill Poindexter for his actions over Foggy's death, and Daredevil stopped Karen from taking out Poindexter as she lashed out at Daredevil for always protecting their enemies like Kingpin and Poindexter, and pleaded with him to let her take the burden of killing Poindexter. And we also saw in this episode Blake was celebrating his birthday with BB Urich, but he was secretly ordered to get information about who really was responsible for the leak on Wilson Fisk. And we also saw in this episode Kingpin and Daredevil having a brutal and emotional showdown. While this is all going on, we see massive protests outside City Hall, and this leads to Karen Page losing her wig and getting arrested by Powell, who instantly recognizes her. And that was how we ended episode 6. And that sets up for this episode, which is, of course, episode 7. So, with that all said, let's not waste any more time. Let's get straight into it. Let's talk about episode 7, The Hateful Darkness. So, we see this episode takes place in the aftermath of the New York City Hall riot, as we see Karen Page is arrested and detained at the 15th Precinct Police Station, where the Kingpin goes to personally see Page in her cell and calls her a criminal and mocking her for getting into it out of love. But Page notices that he is scared, and Kingpin responds by aggressively choking Page through the bars, but Page refuses to show any fear and claims that he took it too far, and the public knows that. He finally lets go of Page and slowly walks away, reminding her to use her one phone call wisely. We then see Jessica Jones confronts Mr. Charles about the attack on her and her daughter, to which he claims that it was a mistake and he only wanted to make Jones back off. As Jessica Jones threatens to kill him if he keeps coming after her, we see Mr. Charles tells her to be careful as he is her only connection to Luke Cage, who is doing work for the CIA, so that Jones would not have to do it. Jones brings up his deal with Kingpin, and Mr. Charles says that the CIA no longer supports him and that Marge McGraffey wants him gone, which spells trouble for her. Jones meets up with Matt Murdock, telling him that Kingpin is likely planning to kill McGraffey so that he cannot threaten his power. The two are joined by Cherry, who informs Murdock that Page is detained at the 15th Precinct as Kingpin prepares to indict her in the vigilante trials. Cherry warns him that since Kingpin is doing it legitimately, Murdock would only prove himself to be a criminal if he breaks Page out. Jones tells Murdock that she cannot stick around and that her daughter needs her, noting that Kingpin will not stop unless someone puts him down for good. At Knickerbocker Village, Daredevil frees Poindexter off his restraints, offering him a chance to commit one good deed that he wanted to do. Daredevil says that while he hates Poindexter for what he did to Foggy Nelson, Paul Lantern, and Ray Nadeem, he knows that he needs to forgive him. Poindexter replies that he will not give Daredevil any promises, but still asks what does he want him to do. I don't trust that guy. Not one bit. Page is approached by Brett Mahoney, who pulled strings as chief of detectives to get Page to the 15th Precinct. He temporarily releases Page from her cell and brings her outside to see Daredevil behind the building. Page tells Daredevil that she cannot run from Kingpin anymore and that she must face trial so he can subject her. Daredevil agrees and claims they might have to cross some lines to stop Kingpin, but not the ones that Page was talking about. She realizes what he means and tries to stop him, but Daredevil insists that he can do it, after which Mahoney brings Page back to her cell. We see Kingpin is working with Benjamin Hochberg in preparation for Karen Page's trial, and he instructs Hochberg to get her convicted on all charges. Heather Glenn visits the office to check on Kingpin, asking how does he feel now that his wife is gone. Kingpin says that while he accepted that love was his prison, he never expected it to be in it alone. He then gives Vanessa's second earring to Glenn, knowing that she stole one of them, showing understanding to what Glenn is going through. We then see Daniel Blake keeping Bibi Urich at his house while trying to think of what to do now that Buck Cashman is onto her. Blake is angered that Urich was using him, but Urich is just as angry at Blake for using her for Kingpin's propaganda, claiming that he killed her uncle. Blake suggests to hide somewhere far where Cashman will not be able to find them, and tells Urich that he would find a way to escape overseas. However, he actually texts Cashman the address where he would bring Urich while he and Kingpin watch the trial unfold. Page is brought to the New York State Supreme Court's building to stand trial with Kristen McDuffie acting as her attorney, while Hochberg acts as the prosecutor. McDuffie is adamant to not only prove Page's innocence but also the illegitimacy of the court and the entire Safer Streets initiative. Suddenly, Matt Murdock shows up at the courtroom to the shock of everyone and acts as McDuffie's co-counsel, much to Kingpin's anger. He helps McDuffie by cross-examining the testimonies of Connor Powell and Cole North, trying to establish the illicit nature of Kingpin's reign. Driving Urich to the designated address, Blake tells her that it is not just Kingpin and Cashman, that he himself is not innocent. He admits to Urich that he helped Cashman dispose of Christophe Savier's body, which he still cannot get over. Urich realizes that Blake is leading her to her death and tries to plead with him not to go down that path. Blake realizes that he is unable to hand Urich over and tells her to run while he would go and see Cashman. As we see the trial is adjourned, Cherry, Angie, Kim, and their allies in the NYPD escort Murdoch and McDuffie out of the courthouse. However, they are attacked by the anti-vigilante task force in the parking lot, forcing the police to fight back. Cherry and Kim manage to evacuate McDuffie out of danger, but we see Murdoch get shot in the leg, and despite being wounded, he manages to get to Clinton Church and prays before Jessica Jones arrives to find him. McCaffrey works to prepare the suspension paperwork and get Kingpin out of the mayor office when she is suddenly attacked by an assassin in her residence. But before he is able to kill McGraffy, we see Poindexter shows up and rescues her before getting away when the authorities arrive. Oh, so he did do a good thing after all, but I still don't trust him. We then see Glenn meets with Paige at the precinct to conduct a psychological evaluation, but Paige does not cooperate and provokes Glenn by indirectly talking about her relationship with Matt Murdock. Stopping the recording, Glenn retaliates by mentioning Kevin Page and James Wesley, the two people Karen Page killed, and starts making comments about the men using her. As Page loses her composure, she brings up Glenn's friendship with Vanessa and pities her for joining Kingpin due to the hurt that Murdoch brought to her. Finally, Glenn falls for Page's provocations and snaps, and leading her to physically attack her and walk away. Glenn very snidely says, "We should do this again some other time," and Page says, "I'm looking forward to it." Blake tells Cashman that Urich will not be coming, making it clear that he is done following orders, and we see Cashman brutally attacks Blake and beats him down to a bloody pulp, demanding him to tell him where Urich is. But Blake does not tell him anything. Pointing his gun at Blake, Cashman says that he does not enjoy hurting him and gives him one last chance to tell him where Urich is. Blake replies that he will not be long until Cashman himself is on the other side of the gun, and while we see Cashman hesitate, he ends up shooting Blake in the head, dead, and leaves him. And that wraps up my review on episode 7, The Hateful Darkness. Like I said, this episode was good, but this was more just about paying off a couple of little story arcs and really setting the stage for the season 2 finale of Daredevil Born Again. But this episode, while it was good, I don't think it was as strong as some of the previous episodes, but it was still watchable and there were some good things I liked about it. But overall, it was good, but not the best. I wouldn't say this was one of the best episodes of season 2, but it was still decent. I quite liked it. But I'm really pumped for the season 2 finale. I can't wait. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What was your thoughts on episode 7, The Hateful Darkness? Did you enjoy it? What was your thoughts on Point Dexter actually doing a good thing? Can he be trusted? How did you feel about Blake getting killed off? Do you think maybe Cashman should have let him walk away? And also, do you think Karen Page will be released? And also, what kind of mindset do you think the Kingpin is in? Do you think he's finally going to erupt? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below. And I will see all of you next time for the final edition of the Daredevil Born Again Season 2 review series, where I'm going to be talking about Episode 8, the Season 2 finale, which I am very much looking forward to, especially with the way this episode played out. It's going to be really interesting to see how Season 2 is actually going to end. It's going to be absolutely epic. So make sure you don't miss that. So until next time, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.